and at some point Zoom will tell me I'm over my limit again. But we're going to figure out, we're going to get these out to YouTube, I think is the best way, and then share them with you guys privately. So today, topic is upfront contracts. We're going to spend the time digging into upfront contracts. We're going to give you a framework, and I know Dan is already a step ahead, and actually I would say probably a bunch of you are already a step ahead on upfront contracts. I know Dan is, because he's like, I already read, 17 hours of material that you sent over. In any event, we're going to teach the basics of the upfront contract. Then we're going to talk a little bit about it and how to apply it in the world of sales. I'd love to get to do some role plays as it relates to the upfront contract. And I will assure you, in the world of sales, and I've probably said this well over 1,000 times, I've taught upfront contracts, I can't even count how many times at this point, to the same companies, to multiple, to different companies, to the same individuals. I am always met with individuals in the audience that say, I do it already. I have yet to meet a salesperson that does what we're teaching here. It just doesn't happen. You might do elements. That's awesome. I can assure you, if you can start to bake in what we're going to talk about today into the world of sales, you're going to be qualifying a lot more people. You'll be disqualifying more too, but you'll find out earlier, and you'll move deals through the pipeline a lot faster. And there is zero rocket science behind what we're talking about today. I do want to start out with, last week we wrapped up on the pendulum theory, or 2 weeks ago, I should say. And, the pendulum theory, we talked about doing things the opposite of what a typical salesperson should be doing. That's really the goal behind the pendulum theory. And really what we teach at Sandler, everything that we teach is about staying behind the pendulum, doing things that are different than the buyer expects. So we talked about it a couple of weeks ago in the context of how do you handle a question. For example, if I said to you, hey, Alex, I think I need what Max Exposure offers in a first encounter, how might you respond to that statement from a prospect?
Curious, why do you think that?
Curious, why do you think that? That's awesome. And it's not, that doesn't sound too difficult, but it is difficult in the moment because you're getting pulled emotionally towards, well, we got somebody who's interested in our product. So that's counterintuitive to what our brain is thinking. It's also counterintuitive to what we've heard about sales. So as we look at this entire process, aside from the words that we teach there, everything we teach is going to do the exact opposite of what the prospect expects from you. So let's dive into the upfront contract. There are 5 elements to an upfront contract. And as a matter of fact, if I did this right, I did it right, but I got a step ahead of myself. There's our pendulum theory from a couple weeks ago. I'm going to skip past bonding and rapport, and I'm going to bring us right into upfront contracts. So 5 elements to an upfront contract. I will give everybody a moment to jot these 5 elements down. Just like that buyer-seller system that we talked about 2 weeks ago, the 4 steps in the buyer system, the 4 steps in traditional selling. Here we've got 5 elements to an upfront contract. You want to commit this to memory. I can tell you, in working with advisors, working with people from different businesses, they've got this next to their phones when they're setting appointments. Some put it in their calendars. Because the beauty of knowing the 5 steps, and we'll walk through them in a moment, but the beauty of knowing them is, let's just say I report to Joe. Joe's my sales manager, and I'm going on an appointment with ABC Company on Friday this week. All Joe has to say to me is, hey, Dave, what's your upfront contract? Now, I can answer him, but what we can do is, in a real smart way, is what's the purpose of the meeting? What's the buyer's agenda or the prospect's agenda? What's your agenda? How much time is allocated, and what time and day is the meeting, and what are your outcomes? So we've got a foolproof system that tells us whether or not we've got this in place. And if Dan and I are talking, and Dan's going out to meet with ABC Company, and he doesn't have one of these elements in place, what does that tell him that he's got to do either between now and the start of the meeting, or when he arrives at the meeting?
Got to set the tone. Set the agenda.
I gotta refill that gap that might exist here. So it gives us a process right out of the gate on how to establish a meeting. So when we look at this, 5 elements: purpose of the meeting, the buyer or the prospect's agenda and their expectations, my agenda, what do I want to cover, how much time we're allocating, the date and the time of the meeting, and what are the clear outcomes. So let's look at time for a second. That's an easy one. Jason, in the world of selling, in the basic world of selling, you might have heard this, or you might have told this to a salesperson. I'll call you in 2 weeks. Call us at the end of May. Call us at the beginning of April. Anybody? Jason, you've heard that, right?
A couple times.
Pre-Sandler. If before Sandler, who would say that that was a pretty good outcome? Would we all agree that sounds like a pretty good outcome?
Yep.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Joe's my sales manager. He says, when are you following up? I said, Joe, end of April. Joe passed me on the back. We go on our way. Life is good. Until May 1st rolls around and Joe goes, how was your meeting with ABC Company? I said, well, they haven't called me back. So the idea of the upfront contract is, in theory, that can't happen. Now, the reality is it still may happen, but we're going to be on that trend where it starts to go away. So we got a purpose of the meeting. Why are we getting together? We have the buyer's agenda. We want the buyer to have an agenda. We want them to tell us what it is they want to cover in a particular meeting and their expectations. Why do you think we want their agenda?
So we know what their expectations are.
Pretty basic. We want to know what their expectations are. Absolutely. Why else? Anybody else want to take a stab? We can go a little bit deeper.
I think it shows how serious and how much they're actually really interested if they take time to make questions and think about what they actually want out of this.
So those two things go perfectly together. Awesome. What else?
Makes them feel like they're buying versus being sold to.
And people love to buy, right? They hate to be sold to. They love to buy. Awesome. These are all 3 perfect so far.
It engages them early in the process.
Bingo. It's their meeting. It's all about them. You put those 4 items together. I can't think of anything else other than those 4. You put those together. This is a meeting that's built on behalf of a buyer. So here's what I want us to do. I want to take a moment. Let me just see if I can set you guys up a little bit differently on my screen to see who I got. I want Joe, Rebecca, and Alex. You guys are buyers, okay? I want you to put your buyer's hat on for a second. You have a life insurance salesperson coming to your house this Friday night. All right? Life insurance salesperson coming to your house this Friday night. Maybe he arrives at 6 or 7 o'clock. You figured out. I want you to write down the things that you want to hear from him or her and what decisions you plan on making on Friday night. I want Dan, Jason, Oleg, and Blakely, I want you guys to be the salesperson. I want you to think about, you're now going out to a buyer's house. You sell life insurance. What are your goals of the meeting? What do you want to cover? You may not know life insurance. That's okay. Make stuff up. What do you want to have happen at the meeting? So think about that. Put on your buyer's hat for the last 4 folks. First 3 folks put on your sellers. First 3 folks, buyer's hat. Last 4 folks, seller's hat. I almost mixed you guys up there. And just jot down some of your expectations that are going to happen. I'll give you about 30 more seconds to jot down some notes. We should play some music in the background. Somebody's buzzing. I guess that's a timer, right? Someone actually had a timer. All right. So David Sandler had a great line. David Sandler said, "There is no, if you are a in-home salesperson, you should have a 100% close rate. because you should never leave that person's house until they actually buy from you. So if they're coming to your house on Friday, that could be a little scary thought because they might be there till Sunday or Monday. So Joe, Becca, and Alex, what are some of the things as buyers you want to accomplish when this life insurance salesperson comes over? Just call them out.
I want to know the terms that they're offering.
Sure.
I want to know how much it's going to cost.
Okay.
What the enrollment process is.
All right.
What makes them better than their competitor, or how their process is different.
Nice.
So I just said basically I just want to get some information and a quote. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, give me all the info. Let me get some info, but what decision am I going to make on Friday night, Alex?
Nothing.
No decision to be made. All right.
I'm giving them an answer in 2 weeks because I have other meetings set up.
2 weeks because I'm shopping around. So I got to wait 2 weeks before I can even give it. How much time do you want to allocate on a Friday night to this insurance salesperson coming over? Before you call it out, I want the salespeople, the Dans of the world, Blakely's of the world, how much time do you want to have for this meeting? Write those numbers down. So Becca, how much time do you want? Or Joe, how much time do you want for this meeting?
I'm going to give them 45 minutes to an hour. 45
to 60. That's a fair amount. Alex, how much time would you give?
5 to 10 minutes.
5 to 10.
Give me the information and the quote, and I'll look it up online and get all the information.
He's such a millennial.
He is. So I'm curious because Becca's might only be 4 to 5 minutes. So
I was going to say like maybe 15, 20 minutes.
15 to 20.
I was going to say, why are you even giving them any time? Just say send over the information, right?
Yeah. So look, let's be realistic. We got different buyers in different age brackets. They're gonna allow a different amount of time. And also, it is Friday night, so I might have plans. If it's me, I don't have plans, so he gets to spend 2 or 3 hours. Becca and Alex, they got stuff going on in their lives. So how about the rest of? Now let's jump over to the sales folks. What are some of the?
I want to also throw something out there, Dave.
Yeah, go.
Because the difference between the millennial and myself is an insurance salesman. I want to know if this guy is going to be real, if he's going to be around. I want to have a relationship there. So I think that's also part of this interview process.
That's awesome. So I've done this exercise probably about 50 plus times. I've never heard anybody use that one. And I really want to understand who this person is. That's important. So let's jump over to the salespeople. So what are some of the things that you sales folks want to accomplish on Friday night? Or what's your agenda? What are you all about?
Well, I want to get through the 6-pack I'm bringing, so I have an hour.
I'm going to bring a 6-pack, so will you give me an hour for that?
For me, I'll go first. I would want to find out what the pain is of the person, what they're going through, what their decision process might be, and what their budget would be.
All right.
I wrote down pain as well.
All right, Oleg, jump in here.
Oh, sorry about that, guys. Yeah, I mean, I wrote down pain points, if it's going to be a good fit, what the budget is, what the timeline is, how fast do they need this to get done.
All right. Blakely, what did you have?
I had budget, time frame, and then also like products that they're interested in. Like, so what is their family like? So getting to know them. And on Joe's side, I know I technically fall into the very edge of the millennial category here, but for me, yeah, getting to know them and seeing what their needs and wants is and what I have to offer wouldn't necessarily fit within their family and what they need.
Okay.
I'm buying from Blakely from now on.
There you go.
Holla.
You need any IT staffing? Because she's got it. She's got it. All right.
I put down something I usually do in the beginning of an in-home sale is ask them if they have any questions about the process. Usually we might have talked about things they want to go over. Sometimes the appointment was set for me and I didn't have a chance to talk with them.
Yeah.
Either way, I kind of sit down and say, okay, life insurance has been around a while. There's a lot of different products. Before I get started, what is it that you guys have questions on, or what are your concerns? And usually they'll kind of tell you how to sell them. Well, we wanted to get term, but it was not secure enough, and we liked whole life. But so what is the difference? And then they say something like that, and you're like, well, that's a great place to start. Let's talk about the differences
Right.
between term and, just as a way to kind of get springboarded into everything else.
Yep. So let's look right at the beginning, right at the most basic. We've got, God bless you, two different things going on. We've got buyers. I just want the data and the facts. I don't think any of the buyers really talked about sharing any information. That's pretty standard. I just want to gather up the info, but if you notice, all of the sales folks are going, I want to understand why. I want to understand what you're willing to invest. So there's already a little bit of breakdown and expectations on what's going to go on in the meeting. Now let's jump over to time. Oh, like how much time would you want for this meeting? How much time would you want to be in somebody's house for?
I mean, I would say about 45 minutes to an hour.
45 to 60, okay. Any other salespeople have different times?
That's, yeah, 45, 60. I mean, I could do it in an hour, a half hour. I mean,
Okay, Blakely?
I mean, I said if this is the initial thing, I think 30 minutes, because I think that if you are sending out the invitation to get in the first place, asking for 30 minutes of somebody's time is a whole lot less of an ask than asking for an hour of their time on a Friday night.
Okay, so 30 minutes, nowhere did anybody go under 30 minutes. And I think all of us from a sales standpoint are saying, hey, let's take more time. So typically what we find in the world of selling is salesperson always wants more time than the buyer. So we have a disconnect there, because what happens on a Friday night, let's think about the reality. On a Friday night when this salesperson shows up and you do start asking some questions, what's your biggest fear?
Gotta go.
As a salesperson or as a buyer?
As the salesperson.
Yeah, so we've got a gap on what the time looks like here. And if we've got gaps in time, we're creating what we call mutual mystification. And when we have mutual mystification, what we've got is buyers who are typically a little bit more on guard than other buyers. When there's a little bit of a disconnect, I am going to be a little bit more on guard, because let's imagine I invited Becky out for 30 minutes to sell me the life insurance policy. We're now 45, 50 minutes in. Probably getting a little bit antsy. I'm probably getting worried. How do I, A, get her out of my house, and B, how do I tell her no? So my guard is getting built up. So we believe in this thing called no mutual mystification. We want to be sure that the buyer and the seller are on the same page. They have an upfront contract, some sort of verbal agreement as to what's going to happen. Now let's go one step further. Outcomes. We have something called outcomes at Sandler, and this is what I would say is the most critical piece of the upfront contract. Every meeting should have outcomes. So let's look at this initial meeting. In the Sandler world, in a first meeting, there's always 3 outcomes. And it depends on the product, but typically there's always 3. One is either one of us can say no to the other one. So that would sound like, hey, Blakely, if we get to the end of today's meeting and I don't see you as a fit, I will tell you that we're not going to do business together. Are you okay with that? And on the flip side, Blakely, if you see that I'm not a fit for what you're looking for, I hope that you feel comfortable enough to tell me that I'm not a fit. And we'll still part ways as friends. So we very explicitly lay out that either party has the opportunity to say no. I threw it out to you guys in this setup with me telling her that I could tell her no up front. Anybody want to guess why I want to tell her that I can tell her no before she tells me no?
Put her mind at ease.
Put her mind at ease, and what else is going on there?
It should be up to me. It shouldn't be up to you. It's up to me.
Making them a buyer. You're not selling.
Bingo. And also Blakely's got it. Psychologically, if I tell you I can tell you no, what do you want to do?
Take it back.
I want to do the exact opposite of what you tell me I can do. Don't tell me no. So psychologically, I'm going to put a little edge here. At the conclusion of today's meeting, Alex, I could tell you no, then you can tell me no. That's outcome number one. Outcome number two is a yes. Hey, Oleg, if we get to the end of today's meeting, another option that I see is you can want to buy what I have. It doesn't always happen in a first. At Sandler, we don't always sell in a first meeting. We're usually a 2 or maybe longer call close depending upon the size of the deal. But I will tell someone, at the conclusion, you might find that you like what we have. And if you do, we'll figure out how to get you up and started. Doesn't always happen. So I tell him how he can buy if he chooses. And then the third piece is I'm going to look for a clear next step. And a clear next step sounds like this. Hey, Alex, typically what happens, is we see that there is a fit between our two companies. Maybe we're not going to do business, but we know that there's something there. What we'll be doing at the conclusion of the meeting then is getting our calendars out, and we'll be setting up that next meeting probably over the next week or 10 days. Does that work for you, Alex? What did I just guarantee myself if I do that third one?
Next meeting.
What do most salespeople struggle getting?
Next meeting.
Next meeting.
Because they love, call me in 2 weeks, call me at the end of the month. Oh, if you can just give me a couple of days and get back to me, I'll get you back on the calendar. And then what do we start doing?
Chasing.
So what happens when they don't want to take out the calendar, Dave? Are you going to address that?
Yeah. So let's address it right now because it's a great question. So if somebody doesn't, let's go a little bit sideways for a second. Think about your best clients that you've sold along the way and put them in the 80-20 rule. And I think that that's Pareto's law, right? 80-20?
Yep.
All right. So let's think about the 80-20 rule. 80% of your clients were awesome to deal with, right? They got out the calendar. Things like this often happen naturally. They were forthcoming. They shared information. So now we're going to bake in this idea of creating next steps in that meeting and through every meeting throughout the sale. But inevitably, you're going to run into somebody like an Oleg who says, you know what? Can you just give me a day or two to reach back out to you and see what my calendar looks like? In my business, and I'll take this, I would suggest you take it with a grain of salt and see how it fits in yours. In my business, if you are not putting me on the calendar at that moment, I am going to disqualify you. Because here's what I found. Now, let's look at the steps that have occurred. Oleg, just hang in there with me. I don't know if I'm going to call on you, but you're the guy right now. Oleg and I have a first meeting. And that first meeting has an upfront contract set up. I'm coming out to his office. We're going to spend 45 minutes. He's agreed that we could say no, we could say yes, or at the conclusion of the meeting, we're going to take the last 5 minutes, get our calendars out, and set up that next follow-up meeting. We get to the end of the meeting. I say, hey, Oleg, it sounds like there's a good fit here. Not sure, but perhaps we should get our calendars out. And Oleg says the exact opposite of what I want. What is that, Oleg?
Let's think about this in a couple of weeks.
Let's think about it in a couple of weeks. What was Oleg's agreement with me going into the meeting?
That you'll book something.
Yeah, so the fact that he is pulling away from that, I'm going to say something to the effect of, hey, Oleg, can I make a suggestion? When we first set up this meeting, we agreed that if there were a good fit, that we would open up our calendars. My guess is maybe you're not feeling the same that I am. Would it make sense that we just cut it right here and maybe this is just a no at this point?
Fair enough.
So I'm going to call him out on it. Now, that is going to be not only pretty pure Sandler, that's how I'm going to operate. Because I believe I've done a good enough job on the upfront contract that he's going to fit into my 80% bucket. Most people that want to do business with me are opening up the calendar. Those folks that didn't open it up, you know what I learned over the years, Joe? We typically don't get business from them, no matter what we do. So I say that from a Sandler perspective, you need to analyze your business and see if that's the same outcome.
Dave, do you put them into some kind of a follow-up campaign of some kind?
Absolutely, because Sandler believes no for now. Doesn't mean Oleg's a bad guy. Maybe Oleg struggles telling people no. Maybe he's just not feeling it, right now. it doesn't mean that he's going to turn and just completely disappear. So I want to make sure I have some level of drip going on with him. But what I am going to make sure is while I drip on him over here, he will not show up as a top-tier prospect. So I will not put any extra effort in. I'll keep him on the fringe. Maybe he circles back around in 6 or 12 months. Who knows? I'll do just enough so that my business, my name is top of mind if something were to pop for him.
So then you flip them over at that point. I'm going to disqualify you, and you know, it's a no for now. But I'll tell you what, as a courtesy, I'll put you onto a email campaign so that if anything comes up in the future, you can be in touch with us.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. All right, fair enough.
Most people are pretty decent people who struggle telling you no. And if they're not willing to get you on the calendar, there's usually, and if you've done a good upfront contract, remember we said we can evaluate going into meeting number 1, did I do a good job here? If I've got all those elements, if I'm going to my meeting with Oleg going, he knows what those clear outcome decisions are, they're usually 95 out of 100 times, he's going to adhere to that upfront contract. We're going to adhere to it. It's a great question. Other thoughts and questions here? We're doing good? Makes sense, right? Makes absolute sense. So we do this for several reasons. Number one is because it does disarm the buyer. What does a buyer expect from a salesperson every time that they meet with them?
Get sold to.
They're going to get sold to. So we're taking that away because we're giving you clear outcomes. There's an option for you to say no. Another fear is you're going to ask for 45 minutes and you're going to stay in my home for an hour and 15 or in my office for an hour and 15. So we hold tight to our time commitments. You want 45 minutes? You got 45 minutes. I'm going to ask for 45 if I need 45. If we decide to go over, I'm just going to ask and make sure that we're cool with that. In my world, what I teach people is if you need 45 minutes for a first meeting, ask for 45 minutes. If it's going over, I typically suggest get the calendar out and set up your next meeting. Leave that meeting with them wanting more. Leave before you spill your candy and give too much information. You can go back, you can strategize, you can reset your upfront contract and look like a professional salesperson, as opposed to the guy or woman who hangs out to just try to close the deal.
Hey, Dave, one comment. When I was out with my prospect last week, it came to the time at the end of the meeting, we had 3 minutes left to actually look at each other's calendars, and there was silence for 3 minutes while we were going through. It was awkward. The old Dan would have said, we'll figure it out later, but the new Dan.
It's awkward.
Yeah, but it was great. And then what I did is I actually had my phone out and I sent her an invite right there. So she accepted, right?
You never leave a meeting without the next meeting scheduled.
Right.
That should be the Sandler rule here. And Dan, when you went out on that meeting last week, what did I tell you? You have 2 jobs. Find a little bit of pain and get the next meeting scheduled.
Yep.
If you operate in that world, you will be pushing deals over the finish line.
Man, did this woman open up to me. I felt like her psychologist. So much pain.
That's our job. That's our job. All right. Any questions or thoughts here? How are we doing on time? Oh, we're doing pretty good. I'm going to go back and forth. Anybody have a question? Thought? We're good? All right. So I'm not always a slide guy, but I think online we got to have some slides to tap into. But I love this slide because it fits in with exactly what we're talking about. Is if you set up clear next steps to go from meeting to meeting, you're going to close more deals than you were previously. So where do you use an upfront contract? Well, you use it everywhere. Actually, Jason would be one of our, and actually Alex would be one of our, well, I should say probably everybody at this point on this call. But you guys know when they're making cold calls, they're doing upfront contracts. Let me take 30 seconds to tell you why I'm calling. So we start our upfront contract as soon as we make our first interaction, and then every meeting starts and finishes with an upfront contract. I'm going to do a quick drawing. It's going to be terrible, just so you guys are aware. But Anybody use any travel sites? Like Expedia?
Expedia.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody know what these are on Expedia when you book a flight?
Ratings?
Not ratings, because this is really bad drawing.
Yeah, it is.
Whoever gets it, maybe gets a bonus prize for figuring it out. I'll start here. Gotta be really careful. So that's Newark.
So your itinerary?
This is your itinerary. So if I want to go from Newark to Los Angeles, but it's not a nonstop. It's got a lot of different, what do we call it, stopovers. This is terrible handwriting, but what airport is this, Blakely?
CLT, that's Charlotte.
Charlotte, all right. So let's imagine, just like booking my flight on Expedia, I want to get from Newark to Los Angeles, right? That's awesome. Just like a sale, I want to get from meeting number 1 to meeting number 4, which is my closing meeting. And I'm not suggesting to anybody to have a 4-step close process. This is for illustrative purposes only. If I miss any of these layovers, what happens with my flight to LAX?
You miss it.
I ain't getting there. So for each one of these, I need to make sure my connection happens. I got to go to Charlotte. I got to get off the plane, get on a new plane, go to Phoenix, get off that plane and get on a new plane to get to LAX. If I do that, I accomplish what I've been trying to do. That is exactly what the upfront contract does for the sale. So when I start my initial call in Newark, I have an upfront contract. When I close, I have an upfront contract that connects me to the opening meeting in Charlotte. At the conclusion of the meeting in Charlotte, I have an upfront contract that brings me right to my Phoenix meeting. I close Phoenix with an upfront contract that brings me to my close in LAX. This is a great way to think about upfront contracts. It bridges the gap in all of your sales steps. So you're using the upfront contract all throughout the sales process. I have some salespeople who go, oh, you know what, Dave, I'm only going to do my upfront contract in the first meeting. No. You do it every meeting. It gets easier and easier. It's hard to do it in the first meeting because that's where you've got to create it. But once you're in the sale, it starts to become very natural. Any questions? Make sense? I'm going to go backwards for a second. So here I'm going to throw out a suggested order of the upfront contract. And I'll give you guys maybe a moment or two to jot down some notes or jot down your first meeting upfront contract. One thing that I want you to be aware of is the purpose of the meeting, although it shows up as one of the 5 elements, it often gets wrapped in the prospect's agenda or the buyer's agenda. So sometimes if I'm meeting with Joe, for example, I may not have to say, hey, Joe, the purpose of our meeting is blank, because it's so blatantly obvious in what it is in the prospect's agenda and expectations, or it's built into my agenda. So when I'm setting up an upfront contract, I'm going to walk us through it. This is the order that I want you to set it up in. Literally, I want you to set it up with his agenda, my agenda, time, and then clear outcome. So it'll play out like this. Joe, can you role play with me for a second?
You got it.
And let's do sales training for a second. So, hey, Joe, my suggestion is we get our calendars out and we get some time to talk a little bit more about some of the sales training you've been looking for. Would that make some sense?
Sounds good.
Yeah. So if we were to get together, what are some of the things that you'd like to hear from me?
Well, I'd like to know what the program is going to entail. How many people, where is it going to be, and how much will it cost?
Okay, so you want to understand what the program is all about. Who should we include? We can figure that out together. Where should we do it? And then also budget. Makes sense?
Yep.
Anything else that you'd want to cover?
What the predictable outcomes would be from the sales training.
Possible outcomes. Boy, that makes a lot of sense, Joe. Some of the things that also our clients want to hear is who else have we helped and what type of results we've gotten from those folks. Are those some things that we should be talking about?
Sure, that would be great.
You'd want to hear a little bit about that? Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd want to add to that list?
Maybe some testimonials from some people or some references I could call.
Is that important to you?
Of course. I wouldn't ask for it otherwise.
Yeah, and if
Stop using that Sandler stuff on me.
and if we get deep enough into this where this opportunity makes sense, happy to share some testimonials and perhaps identify a reference or two that you could speak to.
Great.
Okay. Joe, based on that, my suggestion is we're probably going to need under an hour. Can we find a time where you've got an hour that you can allocate to this?
Sure.
All right, perfect. Let's get that done. Boom. Let's put that to the side. Hey, Joe, before I let you go, and I'll be out at your office next Thursday at 11, my gut says there's 3 things that could happen at the conclusion of the meeting. Can I share those with you?
Sure.
I think the first thing is in this meeting, if I determine that the issues that you've got I can't help you with, I'm going to let you know and tell you that this is not a good fit. You okay with that?
Absolutely.
And Joe, likewise, if you're starting to feel like, hey, Dave, not a good fit, maybe it's me, maybe it's just not Sandler, I'd appreciate it if you told me that we're not a good fit as well.
Okay, no problem.
All right. Joe, based on the size of your team, it's rare. I don't think that this is a buying meeting. However, if let's just say we get together, it's a real good fit, and you say, I'd like to get this done, we'll talk about how we initiate a training program. Would that be okay also?
Yeah. Sounds good.
Joe, typically, though, what happens is at the conclusion of a meeting like this, if we start to see that there is a good fit and we're not sure exactly what the program looks like, what I'm going to do is, maybe with just about 5 minutes to go, I'll ask you to get your calendar out. We'll set up that next meeting. We'll probably do that within a week or 2 at latest, but we'll get that calendared in so we can talk about how to move forward together. You okay with that?
Fair enough.
All right. So, look, I'll see you next Thursday at 11 in your office. I'll be out of your hair by noon, and I'll be coming from another appointment. So if there's any problems, if you can reach out to me or just let me know now, that'd be awesome.
Very good.
All right. I'll see you next Thursday. Boom. Done. You guys will now have this to go back and review. That is literally how an upfront contract in role play sounds. In real life, how it sounds is much more conversational. That might take a little bit longer. But you're going to get the gist of what your first, second, and third upfront contract when you're in the field will sound like. Now, I'm going to pause for a second, and then I'll come back with some feedback. But did anybody pick up things that you liked, maybe you were uncomfortable with, or that you think you could use?
I think I can use it all. My question for you, Dave, though, is do you just keep repeating the process at each meeting? It kind of seems like it might be a little mechanical. We're at a
Great
cocktail.
Question. Very mechanical, especially for a first meeting. It's much more mechanical for a first meeting because I am now putting Joe into the process. What happens at the conclusion of a first meeting is we've had some dialogue. The clarity on what we're supposed to talk about in the second meeting becomes much more obvious and much more conversational. And what you'll find, Dan, is as you get better at doing upfront contracts, what I just showed you for a first meeting, which has a very mechanical feel, that will absolutely go away. You do 3 upfront contracts, the mechanical feeling of it will go away.
I think what he's saying, Dave, in addition to what you're saying is, and Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, at the second meeting, do you do the same upfront contracts? And then at the third meeting, do you do the same upfront contracts?
That's correct, right?
Yeah, so if I miss it, yeah. So the big difference is the agenda. And if I'm not answering it, I need somebody else to clarify. The agendas obviously change and the clear outcomes change. When I get to a third meeting, it's a buying meeting. Hey, Dan, I'm going to bring a contract. You're at a point where now those clear outcomes are shifting to we're moving closer to a sale. So that's going to change throughout the sales process. Is that getting a little bit closer to what you're looking for, Dan?
Yeah, it's the same process, just different pieces, right?
And I think, Dan, it might be also where you're going to say when you start the second meeting, hey, Dan, like we talked about last time I was together, at this point, I feel pretty comfortable saying, if at this point, when we end today, if there's no, reason for us to continue, I'll just be very upfront about it. And I hope you'll do the same for me.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be the full extended version, just a reconfirmation of where you're at.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
makes sense. Yep, cool.
It's a good question. Thank you, Joe, for helping. Other thoughts or questions here? So here's one of the other things I want to share. I'm saying to Joe, hey, Joe, what do you want to cover in the first meeting? Now, Joe is awesome. He's a good role player. He throws back a couple of things. I am repeating what he says because I'm just simply validating that I'm hearing him, which is a great bonding and rapport move, which relaxes him more and more. So as he's going, I want to hear about testimonials. I'm going testimonials, absolutely. So in that sense, Joe is awesome. He's sharing stuff. I also need to be prepared. What does a first meeting look like? What should we be covering in a second meeting? Because sometimes the prospect doesn't know the script like Joe did today. So when you ask a prospect, hey, Blakely, what would you like to cover in our meeting? Blakely sometimes goes, not 100% sure. So I need to feed Blakely with some of the stuff that occurs in a first meeting. Hey, Blakely, when I first get together with somebody, they typically like to hear a bit about our programs. Is that something you like to hear about? What is she going to say? She's going to say, of course.
Yeah, why not?
Of course. And then I very simply follow that up with a what else? What else would you like to hear? She will slowly build in the agenda for me. I always want the prospect to build the agenda. I might have to have some feeder elements that get their mind working. Does that make sense, or does anybody have a question?
Makes sense.
All right, and here's the last piece. The last piece is the time. Blakely, how long is your typical first meeting? How many minutes is your typical first meeting? You have to unmute.
Sorry, I was unmuting myself. I'd say like somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes.
20 and 30 minutes. Okay, let's call it 30 for argument's sake. Every one of Blakely's first meetings is 30 minutes. I don't want Blakely or any salesperson to commit to a time until after they have the buyer's agenda. Because I want, even though every meeting is going to be 30 minutes for Blakely and every first meeting is relatively the same, the moment she says, Alex, for the items that you're talking about, we probably need 30 minutes. Will that work for you? I want the buyer to believe that every one of these meetings is customized around their needs, even though it's the same outcome every time. So I'm talking to Oleg. We have a great conversation. I say, Oleg, based on what you just said, 30 minutes. He's going, wow, this guy's going to give me 30 minutes of his time. We're going to share 30 minutes of time, as opposed to starting with time at the front end. I only need 30 minutes to talk to you about this, this, and this. Traditional selling. That's the traditional selling hat. So I'm going to pause here for a second. I've been doing a lot of talking. Questions and thoughts? Where have I confused anybody?
Regarding time, so I just sent out a bunch of just cold emails or in-mails on LinkedIn, and I ended it by saying, something like, if you have 30 minutes, or it would take 30 minutes to meet for something, So you're saying that's bad, just to set up a time up front? Because I felt like I was lowering the barrier, saying, I only need 30 minutes.
Are they cold emails?
Cold, yeah.
All right. So let's ask the group, because I already know my opinion. But if you guys were to receive an invite for 30 minutes from somebody that you didn't know, what would you do?
It's gotta be less than that. I send mine for 15 minutes, because trying to get somebody on the phone, period, from an email is like pulling teeth. So for me, if I can get 15 minutes and then set up the next appointment and do an upfront contract in that 15 minutes, then that's the best way for me to do it. I just feel like 30 minutes is a pretty big ask if they don't know who you are.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. Just because it's a cold email and they have no idea who you are. If I know you, that's a different story. I can give you 30 minutes. But if you're brand new, it's cold email. I can't justify giving you 30 minutes unless the appeal is so great in your email. Other than that, I'm not going to give you that time.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
usually,
go ahead, Dan.
I was just say, usually what I'll do is sometimes I won't even mention how long it'll be. It'll just be inviting them for a coffee. Do you think that's a lot of people bite at it, but they don't know me from Adam either.
Just for me, I still put a time frame on that and say, hey, let's meet for coffee. Shouldn't take more than 15 minutes for us to chat, 15, 20 minutes. Because I do a lot of that with managers that I know are crazy busy in my industry. And so 15 minutes for them is a decent amount of time on their calendar. So
cool.
If your goal is to set up, and Dave, please stop me, but if your goal is to set up the next appointment that would actually lead, you could kind of get those checklists of everything that you want in that initial phone conversation or initial conversation. That's my goal in that 15 minutes, is to set up an upfront contract for the next meeting that you can kind of dig a little bit deeper. But Dave,
I'm on with you.
stop me.
No, you're doing great. You're doing great. Perfect. And think of the buyer. The buyer is, again, a little bit more armed early on. So if you ask for 30, one of their fears might be that you're going to keep them there for 45 or 50 minutes. So think of it that way. And sometimes, Dan, if you can get the coffee, awesome. Keep it to 30 minutes if people are biting at that. Sometimes it's worthwhile to set up a phone call for, it'll take less than, not 5 to 10 minutes, but less than 10 minutes or less than 30 minutes. Because if you can lock into a less than, they already know that there's a barrier there. This will take that word change can make a difference in somebody accepting a first meeting versus not.
Well, and I think what Dave's also taught me that's really, really important is sticking to that too. So if you tell them it's going to be less than 10 minutes, or if you tell them it's going to be less than 15 minutes, if you sit and chit chat with them for 35, then you just already lied to them. So making sure, and I'm a talker. Surprise. So I have to make sure that I really set almost like an alarm, like a silent alarm on my phone, to warn me that I have 5 minutes to wrap up.
I found that at 15 minutes, you say, my 15 minutes is up. Would you like to continue or would you like to reschedule?
Perfect.
And give them the option to stick it out, because they know 15 minutes is going to go longer, but they want the out at 15 if they want to get out. But at that point, if you say, hey, look, I promised you 15 minutes. I'm a person of integrity. Would you like to continue, or would you like to reschedule for another time where we could spend more time talking? And that always goes an hour at that point.
And Joe, think of the flip of that. Let's imagine somebody invited you to lunch and said, hey, or coffee, hey, Joe, can you do 30 minutes? You may agree to that 30 minutes, but if you don't want to meet with that person, the most time you'll invest is 30 minutes. So be aware when people invite you to meetings from the flip side, hey, Alice, I'd love to have a coffee. Can you afford an hour? If you're a little bit unsure, I can do 30 minutes for a coffee. You can use the upfront contract in reverse to back down somebody else's expectations.
The other thing is when I'm booking appointments with people, the other thing I do is I say, we'll probably be 30 to 40 minutes, but I'm going to book an hour just so we're not rushed if you have any questions at the end.
It's all about setting an agreement.
What's that?
It's all about setting an agreement.
Setting an expectation, and then they have that full hour. They're not going to rush out.
Yeah, I've usually set up an hour for the coffee meeting, just generally, and it usually works, right? But I like the idea of maybe having a quick call up front. The only risk I think there is getting stuck in virtual world, because I think it's so much more important to meet face to face.
Yep. Yeah. So how quickly can you move it from virtual meetings to real life interaction?
Right.
That's how people prefer to buy. All right, I'm going to stop our recording here.